Howdy, everybody. We're picking up where we left off after the last test. So we just finished talking about the 1920s, 1930s in particular, the Great Depression, FDR, the New Deal, all that kind of stuff coming together. So now we're picking up with what we can call the interwar period. So how the rest of the world dealt with the 1920s, 1930s, and the lead up to probably the single greatest war in world history, World War II. So you have to understand, the Great Depression was not just a depression for the United States. This was a worldwide depression, particularly hitting Europe very hard. Now, in particular, Germany is going to be hit probably the worst. So Germany was already in the midst of the depression, but what was making it worse for Germany is that they were still paying back the reparations, that $33 billion that the Versailles Treaty placed upon Germany after World War I. They blame them for the war, and they're making them pay that debt. Now picture, they're paying back this debt, it's crippling your economy already. Then the Great Depression hits on top of that. This is going to further cause Germany to spiral. And this is the hardship. Germany is seeing no way out. We saw how bad and how depressed people were in the United States during the Great Depression. Make that 5, 10 times as bad in Germany. And the people saw no hope. But then one man rose up and said, "We will make Germany great again," and promised to restore power and prestige to Germany, both in Europe and across the globe. And that guy is Adolf Hitler. He is going to say, "We will make Germany great again. We will restore it. We will rise a new Reich, a third German empire." But we're not quite there yet. We got to get Germany there. We got to get Hitler into power. Now we have to understand about Hitler. Hitler did not just pop out of nowhere. He was shaped by very careful things throughout his life that made him into the man he was. So he was a soldier during World War I, had been hit with gas during the war, had some minor lung damage, tried other things in his life. None of them really took off. The one thing that he really wanted to be, more than anything, probably more than an evil, tyrannical, murderous dictator, was an artist. There's an original Hitler. They go for millions of dollars today. But he wanted to be an artist, but no art school would take him. They kept turning him down, rejecting him at every turn. So instead of being an artist, he became a dictator and murdered millions and millions of people. So not exactly a great alternative, but nonetheless. So as Hitler and his small Nazi party, so this is the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party, they're rising up. They're not a very big party at first in the German Reichstag, the German kind of parliament. But eventually they gain a small foothold and slowly they rise to power. Now they're initially kind of appointed. The Nazi power is given a certain level of status, and Hitler is given the level of chancellor in Germany. And the first thing he does, all the other political parties in Germany think, "Oh, we'll let this little party take over for a little bit. We'll let them get the blame for the Great Depression. And then once everyone hates them, we'll take back over and kind of save the nation." Unfortunately, for all these other parties, Hitler wipes them out. He outlaws all political parties except the Nazi Party. And then Hitler takes off. He begins restructuring all of German society and doing a lot of different things. One of the biggest is he starts hitting the youth. He creates what's known as the Hitler Youth, basically creating an evil Boy Scouts. So this is kind of crazy. He takes this concept of the Boy Scouts, but adds a Nazi indoctrination to it. So teach them how to be outdoorsmen, how to survive, all the kind of stuff we think of with Boy Scouts, but add this military component on top of it. Teaching them how to fight, how to kind of believe in this Nazi ideology. And on top of that, he begins rebuilding the German military, something that was forbidden for Germany to do with the Treaty of Versailles. But he rejects it. So 1934, German factories begin building new tanks and aircraft. A year later, 1935, Hitler proposed a 500,000-man army and instituted a military draft in Germany. Clearly, he was gearing up for a war of some form or another. But it's not just Germany that we're having to worry about. It's Japan as well. Because in the 1930s, as America is distracted with the Great Depression, Japan is beginning to spread onto the Chinese continent. In particular, they're targeting Manchuria. Japan, while powerful in the region, does not have a lot of natural resources. So they have to go somewhere else, go to other islands, go to mainland China to pursue and obtain those resources. So what the Chinese do is they plant a bomb on a railroad in Manchuria, blow it up, and they blame the Manchurians for this. And instead, they declare war, blaming Manchuria for this attack on one of their railroads, and they invade. And they conquer Manchuria and rename it Manchukuo. And this is the beginning of the Japanese conquest of mainland China. Now, FDR is worried about this, but there's not a lot he can do about it in the midst of the Great Depression. Now, he knows there's going to be problems, but he doesn't have anything he can really do about it. He says Hitler is a madman, and his counselors, some of which I personally know, are even madder than he is. Yet most people in America aren't paying attention, primarily because the Great Depression has hit. So we maintain neutrality. We passed neutrality acts in 1935, 36, and 37 to keep us out of war. Now, even further, we add on civil war to what we should stay out of as well with the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. So you have an outbreak with Franco, a military leader trying to take over and create a military dictatorship in Spain. Now he reaches out to another military dictator, Adolf Hitler, for help in his civil war. So Francisco Franco reaches out, offers an olive branch, a request for aid to Adolf Hitler, and Hitler takes it. He's going to use the Spanish Civil War as a testing ground for many of his new military units, in particular his Air Force. He's going to send what's known as the Condor Legion, a group of bombers and fighter pilots basically to train and practice in Spain to kind of prepare his soldiers, his pilots, for an upcoming war that he is proposing. But even crazier, in the midst of the Depression, in the midst of all this turmoil, all this conflict, we decide to have an Olympics in 1936. And even crazier, we decide to host that Olympics in Berlin. Now, the Nazis think this is a wonderful time to show off their new kind of worldview, in particular, to show off their brand new idea of an Aryan race, a superior white skin, blonde hair, blue-eyed race that is better than every other race in the world. Now, a lot of the anti-Jewish and anti-Gypsy and different groups propaganda all across Berlin was kind of taken down for the Olympics, but the goal was still the same. But there was a small problem in the outcome of Germany and Hitler's plan to show the superiority of his Aryan race. The problem was a guy named Jesse Owens, an African-American from the United States, beat the Nazis at every turn. And this is the fundamental problem. It's hard to say you have a superior race when black people, people you say are inferior to you, keep beating you in every test of physical prowess. Now, what's even crazier, not only did Jesse Owens, a black African-American from the United States, win in the Olympics, proving Hitler wrong, but what's crazier is the experience he had. So in Nazi Germany, he could ride the subway, the buses, he could get around town, he could eat in whatever restaurants he wanted. He could go around basically like an equal citizen. Clearly the Nazis hate him, but they will at least be cordial to him as a foreign competitor in the Olympics. However, when he returned home, he could not do the things he could do in Nazi Germany. If he wanted to go out to eat, he had to eat in segregated restaurants. If he wanted to go to the movies, he had to go into a separate park. You can see in this picture, it's colored admittance. You have to go around the back and up into the balcony to watch a movie because you're not allowed to sit in the regular part of the movie theater. So think about it. Jesse Owens, hero of the United States, defeater of Nazi ideology, proving that Aryan and racial superiority is wrong, is discriminated against at home. This is what gets really weird. This is what gets really crazy. Now, as we're dealing with the Olympics and trying to deal with our own problems at home, Japan goes even further. They begin to march into mainland China, particularly targeting a city called Nanjing. This is going to lead to a massacre of epic proportions. So we got to understand, as bad as Germany is going to be, Japan during World War II probably does equal or as bad of atrocities as the Germans will, in a different way, with a different goal, but nonetheless equally as bad. So the marching into Nanjing is going to result in what's called the Rape of Nanjing. This is going to be about 6 weeks, from December 1937 to January of 1938. The Imperial Japanese Army murdered Chinese civilians and disarmed combatants. Somewhere around 200,000 Chinese civilians were murdered, with widespread rape and looting during these 6 weeks. As many as 20,000 women were raped during this time period. This is a vast amount of death, needless death in many ways, just because the Japanese saw themselves as a superior race. It's a much of the same rhetoric, just in Asia rather than in Europe. So the same rhetoric that Hitler was using in Germany and in Europe, the Japanese were using in Asia. But as bad as the Japanese are getting, Hitler is getting just as bad. So we got to understand, both sides of the world are beginning to escalate dramatically in what's going on. By 1938, Hitler had rebuilt most of the military and was ready to expand. Now, after World War I, Germany had been isolated, had been made very small. Many of the German-speaking countries, like Austria and Prussia, had been broken off, trying to weaken it. So another war couldn't happen. Well, Hitler, with his brand new army, decides we're going to take that back. So first, you notice that bottom portion, Austria, big German-speaking country. So Hitler says, well, it makes sense. They speak German, we speak German. We're just going to annex Austria back into Germany to create a larger, greater Germany. And when the armies marched into Austria, they were met with cheers and celebration. Well, not from everybody. Jewish Austrians were very weary and wary of what was happening. They could see the writing on the wall, and some of them did flee. Others thought, oh, let's just keep our heads down and maybe we can avoid the worst of this. The worst was yet to come. Now, the next big part that Germany wanted to take control of was something called the Sudetenland. It's this kind of big mountainous region along the western side of Czechoslovakia. Now, it had been given to Czechoslovakia as kind of a buffer, a barrier zone. But the problem was, most of the Sudetenland was German-speaking. So Hitler claims all this stuff should belong to Germany. They're German speakers. They want to be in Germany. We're going to annex them back to Germany. So he decides, I'm going to take the Sudetenland. Now, not everyone is thrilled with this. France, England are starting to chafe into this. And they say, bad Germany, you shouldn't have taken Austria. They don't do anything. Then when he looks like he's going to take the Sudetenland, they yell at him again. He says, no, 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 all I want is the Sudetenland. And they say, okay, fine, whatever. So he marches in and takes the Sudetenland. And then he does this crazy thing, trips, and takes all of Czechoslovakia. And basically annexes the entire country into German rule. And this is the main problem. This is when European leaders, particularly Neville Chamberlain from England and the French Premier, Edward Dallier, come and meet with Hitler. They say, we have to talk about this. And Hitler says, no, no, this is all I wanted. I just wanted to reunite all the German-speaking people. I'm good. I'm done. Don't have to worry about it anymore. And lo and behold, they believe him. When Neville Chamberlain gets back to England, he holds up the agreement he made with Hitler and said, I have secured peace in our time. We will not have war. He was a very short-lived politician after that speech, because almost immediately after, things started getting really bad. Hitler and Germany are going to unleash what's known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. This was the beginning of their final solution for the Jewish people. On November 9th, 1938, Jewish homes, synagogues, and businesses all across Germany that were owned by Jews were attacked. Over 1,000 synagogues were burned. Many Jews were rounded up. Many were killed in this night. Tens of thousands were rounded up and put in camps and isolated and marked. And this is the beginning of the problem. We know what's going on We see this happening. The world is shocked. FDR says, I myself could not scarcely believe that such things could occur in the 20th century. So we knew it was happening. He calls out to the world nations saying, what can we do? How can we help the Jews in Germany? He called for a conference of 32 nations. Most refused. Holland is the only one of any amount that took the Jews. Even the United States refused when they could most ably help the Jews. We did not. When Jews had the best chance of leaving Germany before the Holocaust, they could not because very few places would take them. What's unfortunate about the Jews that were able to go to Holland, thought they escaped. But once World War II starts in earnest, in just a year or two, Holland very quickly will fall under German rule. And then the Jews that thought they had escaped are now finding themselves back under German control. We do accept a few Jews, but they have to be smart Jews, what seems to be a useful Jew for the United States in order for us to accept them. People like Albert Einstein, someone that would be a credit to the United States. We only took 8,500 Jews from Germany and anywhere else in the world a year. And it's going to be this fact that Americans simply don't want to get involved with Europe, regardless if it means helping Jews or not. It's going to be here that Germany unleashes its war on the continent, starting with Poland. Now, what's interesting about the attack on Poland is it's not just Germany. Even though Nazis and communists hate each other, Germany manages to make a deal with Russia. Hitler and Stalin get together, and they're going to create what's called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So this is an agreement basically saying, Russia, you get half of Poland, Germany will get the other half, we'll split it, and we'll be friends. We won't attack each other. It's a non-aggression pact. We will not fight each other. Stalin likes this because it gives him a buffer zone. So if Germany does attack him, it is a barrier to kind of absorb that attack before it gets to the mainland Russia. And Germany wants it because they want to reunite main part of Germany with East Prussia. They want to reunite those two German-speaking areas. Now, it's at this point that England and France say enough's enough. They get their stuff together and they declare war on Germany. And this is, going to escalate dramatically. And with the fall of Poland and the declaration of war by England and France, Germany unleashes blitzkrieg, kind of its lightning war in the most purest sense. They attack hard, fast, massive waves of troops and tanks, and overwhelm the Allied forces in a very short amount of time. In April of 1940, the Nazis overran Norway and Denmark. By May of 1940, they had invaded Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. And shortly after, they invaded France, and northern France fell without hardly a fight to Germany. This happened for very particular reasons that we'll get into a little bit later. But with the attack of France and the fall of the Free French armies, you have kind of France collapsing, and then Hitler turns his eye to the last remaining European opposition, which is going to be England. And he begins attacking England via the air, using what's called the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. And they begin bombing England, trying to bomb them into submission, to force them to capitulate and surrender simply from bombing. So this is where, if you've ever watched Chronicles of Narnia or anything like that, where they put little messages on the kids' lapel and send them out to the countryside to get them away from the bombing. And Germany was hoping that this would break the British will to fight. But it doesn't. The British survive the bombings. They keep surviving the bombings. They dig hard, they dig deep, they move factories underground, they move housing, they create bomb shelters out of subways, and the British keep going. They endure, and they're more devoted to the war than ever. So this is something we have to understand, something that's being shown during this time period. Bombing is not going to break the will to fight. They'll try it. Every side will try it during the war, but it does not work, at least not in the way the armies are hoping. So how do Americans feel about this? Well, frankly, they don't care. They may not like what Hitler's doing. They may not agree with the aggressiveness of it all, but they just don't want to be part of another European war. We're at the tail end of our Great Depression. We're just starting to come out. We don't want to commit to something big and bloody and violent. It's not what we want. Now, FDR, he's a little more concerned. He sees the writing on the wall. And when Winston Churchill comes to him and says it's a matter of life and death, whether or not the US sends aid, even if you don't join the war, please send aid in some form or another. And FDR will do this. We can no longer afford to allow England to try to do it alone. England will collapse if they are trying to pay for this war to support the war effort on their own. So FDR says we must be the great arsenal of democracy. He's going to create what's called the Lend-Lease program, which we'll talk more about next class. But in March of 1941, a $7 billion Lend-Lease program is created, which is basically where all the weapons, supplies, ships, equipment that we need to fight a war will be leased and lended to England and their allies for the duration of the war, and they can pay us back after the war is over. So basically, we're loaning them all the supplies, and they'll pay their debt to us afterwards. Now, while Germany is beginning to wreak havoc across Europe, Japan is beginning its battle. They see a need to expand their control of islands in the Pacific, particularly certain islands that have resources like oil and rubber and different things. They need to wage war. Now, you can kind of see on this slide, you have this dotted line. This is the Japanese defense perimeter. This is what the Japanese feel, this defensive zone. If they can take all the islands within this zone, they can hold them indefinitely. The problem is, England, France, the United States, and Australia control many of these islands. That means if they want to control all this, to get all these resources to ensure their security and defense against anything they want to do, they're going to have to go to war with far more people than just China. And this is where the Japanese, particularly the military and the Navy, decide if we hit Pearl Harbor, if we can wipe out the US fleet at Pearl Harbor, we can win a war against the United States. If we take out their entire fleet, it'll take the United States so long to build back up that we can build such defenses, such strong defenses, that the US can never pry us out of these Pacific islands. And this is a good idea because Pearl Harbor, the United States has made a very flawed choice in many ways. We stationed our entire Pacific fleet at Pearl Harbor, basically put all our eggs in one basket. Not ideal, not great, but this is what we did. So on December 7th, 1941, at 7:40 a.m., a vast Japanese fleet of warplanes, about 350, made a complete surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. And this is going to be a devastating attack. The first wave brought a vast majority of their bombs, wiped out many of our planes. About 300 planes in total were lost. 18 warships had been sunk or badly damaged. The Oklahoma capsized after taking 3 torpedoes from torpedo bombers, trapping 400 men below deck. And this is going to be devastating. About 2,400 Americans are going to be killed. The second assault came at 9 a.m. and completed the carnage. Now, this could have been a lot worse for 2 major reasons. First, there were major oil reserves on the Hawaiian Islands. Thankfully, when the Japanese attacked, they missed or did not know about, or for whatever reason did not attack these oil reserves. That meant we had fuel to power the remaining ships in our Navy. Second, 2 of our aircraft carriers had been out on patrol when the attack came, meaning that 2 of our aircraft carriers were still ready to fight. This is going to change the nature of warfare, naval warfare during World War II. We're going to shift away from battleship-focused warfare and shift to a carrier-focused warfare because that's all the United States has. We're going to quickly try to repair our ships that are damaged, get stuff back up, build new ships, but we at least have something to strike back. Now, during the battle, many men fought hard against the Japanese, did the best they could. One in particular was Dorste Miller, a cook on a ship in the harbor. Now, African Americans during this time period in the Navy could only have the rank of cook. They weren't allowed to be any other real class at the beginning of World War II. He was on duty on December 7th when the attack came. And when his ship came under attack, he immediately jumped into one of the anti-aircraft guns and began defending the ship, even though he had never been properly trained in this. And when his gun ran dry, he began pulling people off the boat, time and time again, rescuing them, until the ship itself began to sink and he had to abandon his ship. And for his valor, he was given the highest rank he could receive. He was awarded the Navy Cross and he was promoted to the highest rank he could have. Third-class cook, because that's the highest rank an African American could have. So despite all his valor, despite being one of the bravest men during the attack at Pearl Harbor, he was still only awarded a cook. Unfortunately, during a later battle off the Gilbert Islands, his ship will be sunk and he will die. This is where the United States decides to declare war. We'll talk more about the declaration of war a little bit later, but we decide finally, this is the moment where we declare war. And what's going to be interesting about this is Japan has awoken the United States. We were already kind of supplying England with resources, material, tanks, planes, all that kinds of stuff. But now they've woken the whole United States up out of its slumber, and they've created an enemy that is going to be, for both Germany and Japan, virtually insurmountable. Because we're going to do something no other nation in World War II is able to do. We're going to fight a war on two fronts. We will simultaneously be fighting one war in the Pacific against Japan, while we fight a second war against Germany in Europe. So we'll pick up with how the United States began mobilizing for war next class.